Welcome back to the Money Growth Project channel. I am joined today by a special guest and the first actually official interview, the first millionaire interview on this channel, joined by the one and only Jeremy Lefebvre. Jeremy, say hi to everybody.
Hello, folks, and thank you, Jacob, for having me. This is amazing.
Well, thanks for coming on, man. So some of you probably are familiar with Jeremy in the financial space. He's got 3 huge YouTube channels. So Financial Education, Financial Education 2, and Financial Education 3, which are all going to be linked down below. And then also him, me, Kevin, Graham Stephan, and Andre Jick are doing one together. So Millennial Money, I'll also link that down below too. So this guy's all over the place. Yeah. So Jeremy comes on here. If you guys don't know, Jeremy's made a great living for himself in the stock market for the last 12 or 13 years, being able to make multiple millions of dollars. Now he's on his 3rd home in real estate in recent years. So Jeremy's done very well. But part of the reason I wanted to have Jeremy come on this channel and to talk to you guys is because a lot of people think, people who are millionaires, they think they inherited money, they got a whole bunch of money. But Jeremy, growing up in Arizona, grew up in a food stamp family, grew up poor through his youth years, worked as a teenager, young adult, like a lot of us did. And then eventually you end up quitting that and doing your own real estate photography company, also doing YouTube while being married, starting the family, doing all that kind of stuff, to eventually just focusing on YouTube now and also having your private stock market mentorship group. Yeah. So is that a pretty decent rundown?
That was an incredible, man. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of grind. That's what I'll say. It was a lot of work, a lot of strategic thinking around how I wanted to do things, and a lot of always kind of even when I started with really small amounts of money. Let's say when I was first starting investing, and it was like a few $100 at a time. Even back then, I treated it with like a huge level of seriousness, where it was like I pretended in my head like it was $1 million, or it was like I'm investing $10 million, even if it was like $500 or something.
Right. Well, and then it's always relative to your income. When you said you're working at QuikTrip, working there, you're working convenience stores. If you're making 30, 40, 50, 60,000 a year, then $500, $1,000, that is a lot at the time.
Well, it's crazy though, because I consistently come across people that disrespect whatever amount of money they have at a particular time. So I'll get messages sometimes from people and they're like, hey dude, I only have $12,000. Is it even worth investing? I'm like, what? Of course. Like, are you kidding me? I'm like, I would have dreamed to have $12,000 when I was first starting in the stock market. Like, come on, man. But yeah, people consistently put themselves down because they only have so much, or they only make so much and things like that. And it's like, hey, use this as a stepping stone to get to the next place and the next place. So you don't have to compare yourself to Warren Buffett starting off. So everything's relative.
So when someone says I only have this much, so here's something that I would think be interested from the beginner perspective is, say you're looking at 2 different stocks. Say you have $1,000 to invest. You're looking at 2 different stocks. And for simple math, let's say one of them is Facebook and they're about $250 a share. Then let's say the other one is like Planet 13, and let's say they're $10 a share, right? So if they only have $1,000, but they could get way more shares of Planet 13, the smaller company, saying they like them both equally and similarly, do you think for someone who's new, they could get as, quote unquote, more bang for their buck investing in a company that's smaller price share?
Yeah, it doesn't really make a difference. It only matters about the percentage gain and the dollar amount gain. So if it's the same dollar amount, all that matters is like the percentage gain. At the end of the day, like how a newer person to like the stock market should really be thinking is that first you got to understand like this is an actual company you're investing in. When you buy a share of a stock, if you use Facebook as an example, you buy 1 share of Facebook, you are now literally part owner of Facebook, a very, very, very small owner of Facebook, but you are. And so, how you should really be thinking is about the business first. Like, how much do you really believe in that business over the coming years? And then you can start to look at more of the financials and the revenues and the net income and things like that, all financially available information. You can Google this stuff like Facebook Investor Relations or whatever company it is out there and get all that data. But yeah, you should really be looking at it from a perspective of you're becoming part owner in that business, and do you believe in that over the coming years? And that if you sell out 3 years from now, 5 years from now, the share price is going to be, let's say, elevated versus where you bought at. That's the name of this game.
So starting point is just understanding the business first. That's one thing I heard you say before. Like when you give tips to people, you say before you dive into all the numbers, before you get into the nitty gritty, it's like first look at the business. And try to do what you can to understand that business, and then you're diving into numbers, and then you're diving in things. So someone after they look at a company, they look at a business, maybe they've worked in restaurants for years and they feel like they understand restaurants fairly well.
Yep.
What do they need to do? What's, the next few steps you would say to understanding that company better?
Yeah, then you can kind of go into the financials, and you can look at things like an income statement, which, if you break down an income statement in your own life, it's like how much money are you making, let's say, each month, and then how much of it actually stays in your pocket versus goes out to bills or goes out to eat and all the other things, right? So that's the next thing. Then you want to look at the balance sheet, which is essentially looking at assets versus liabilities. And that's really, really dang key. I mean, think about your own life. You have every person has their own income statement and their own balance sheet, right? How many assets do you have? Do you own a car? Do you own a house? Do you own, what type of liabilities do you have? Debts, things like that, credit card debt, student loan debt, whatever it is, right? So those are where you're going to want to go from there. Then you can kind of get into some of the more complicated things like the valuations and P ratios and forward P. And, then you kind of are really starting to dive in and understand things. But for the newer investors to the market, the fundamentals are key. Like It starts with the fundamentals of that business. And then you can go from there and kind of dive into the financials and valuations and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So really, basically it's the same process no matter which company you're looking at.
100%. Yep, same exact process. Some companies definitely have more risk than others. Some companies are going to outperform the stock market and do tremendous and make you a lot of money. Other stocks could lose you money. So yeah.
So for someone who is new to the stock market and say they grew up like you, where their family was on food stamps, so they're, forget, being able to invest and own in a business and, even start their own business, that kind of thing. For them, maybe just having a long-term job or a career as an employee would be something that would be kind of new to them. So for you to even go from that position, where from a food stamp family to where now, you got multiple houses, you have your own team of people running your stock group for you. You've started several businesses now. How does that switch take place from the mentality of poverty and lack to the mentality of abundance and the mentality of, there's plenty of wealth in the world?
Well, it started because obviously in my early childhood, we were definitely very, very poor. But then something switched. As I was starting to grow up, my dad started a small pool business of his own, and he broke out on his own. And he actually built that to a place where when I was about to go to middle school or so, we were actually able to move out of the neighborhood we were living in and actually move to like a middle class neighborhood, which, by the way, when you go from poverty to middle class, you think you're rich. Even there, you realize, like, nowadays I look back and I'm like, oh, we moved into the middle class. That was cool. But yeah, seeing him start that business, he never expanded it. He never hired employees or anything like that. But just seeing that he made them move from that, where he was trying to work at used cars dealerships and all these different things that we were just, in the poverty cycle, to then starting his own business, making a success of that, to actually be able to pull us out of that and take us to the middle class. That's why I always understood from that perspective, like, this is how it's done. And something I've just been fortunate enough to be able to do and understand how to do is like taking things to the next level. So, breaking out into entrepreneurship and understanding like being able to hire employees and actually building a company with like, independent contractors and employees and all these sorts of things. But yeah, I think that was a big moment. And I was always involved in my dad's business as a kid. As soon as school basically ended, I went to work with him every day in the summer, and it was hot. It was like 110 every day. It's in Phoenix, Arizona. But it taught me a lot of good lessons around hard work and around owning a business. And where he did business, where most of his pool accounts were in retirement community.
Right.
And what I got to see there is I got to see like people that were like how did these people get here? And what I found is a majority of them had some sort of money invested in the stock market. And I think seeing that kind of also sparked something in my brain, like, these people are doing something in regards to stock market. Maybe someday I'm going to look into that. And then when I turned 18, 19, that's when I really started diving into stock market investing and started taking it serious.
Geez, so really, your father showed you that there was another lifestyle, that there was, another way.
Yeah.
And then basically, you were young, the seed was planted, and you were off and running.
Yeah. Literally seeing that and seeing him get his business to a place where he was making $80K a year, coming from where we were at the time to see it build his business to maybe making $80K or so a year was huge, in my mind. And it was always something that stuck with me. just getting to see like how that transpired and how that happened.
Well, but in adulthood, there was a time where you kind of had to make that like, you had to come to that fork in the road and decide where you're going to go. Because at QuikTrip, if I remember right, you said you were at a managerial role like in your early 20s.
Yep.
And weren't you making like 60,000 a year or something?
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty good when you're for a lot of people in their early 20s to be in that kind of role. So, I mean, you were like, okay, do I stay on this and keep going, or do I go, this route that my father showed me? Do I continue doing what my father showed me?
Yeah. I mean, I was rising the ranks at QuikTrip, QT. We were living out in Charlotte, and I was even on the promotion list to get promoted to the next position. And ultimately, even though QT was a very good company, whenever you're trying to climb the corporate ranks, one, you're dealing with crazy amounts of competition, right? Everybody wants that next position. You're dealing with politics, like all that stuff plays a part. But also, even when you get to that next position, it's not usually a huge jump in pay. And so you're not really taking your own destiny into your own hands. When you start your own business, right? Obviously, there's more risks, but there's also risk in working for a company, right? Like your job is safe until your boss comes in and says you no longer have a job, and then how it's safe is your job. But like QT, I had a good job, but I was looking at it and I'm like, man, if I start a business, like there's unlimited potential for me, right? Literally unlimited. And so I looked at it from that perspective, and that's what really I think additionally kind of drove me in terms of just being bogged down by, QT was a big grind. It was like 48 to 50 hours a week. Had to wake up at like 4 a.m. each day and, driving 30 minutes across town. So really, just there and then 30 minutes back home. I mean, when you add all that up, it's like, geez, man, this is a grind. And my next position, it might take me another year, 2 years, 3 years to get to make maybe a couple thousand extra bucks. Versus starting your own business, and you could have exponential growth.
Right.
So it's a total different mindset, and it's a total different opportunity in front of yourself when you start your own business.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it was interesting to hear that when you've talked about that in your videos you're like, okay, do I go down this route? Because you were doing the real estate photography.
Yeah.
And then did you quit QuikTrip to do the photography?
I quit QuikTrip just to enjoy the first year of my son being born and to focus on stocks solely. I never, 100% focused on stocks, obviously working at QuikTrip. And I took off about a year, maybe a little over a year, enjoyed my firstborn son's first year of life. And that's something I'll definitely never regret. Like that was cool. And, just got to experience that, focus on stocks. And then it was kind of like, okay, we need to get into something, man, start making some money again. Yeah. And because I was just living off savings, that I had from basically investing and having success in the market and whatnot. I had like $200K when I left QuikTrip just in stocks. And so I was in a pretty good financial position. But hey, when you got a kid and you got a family, you know what I mean? Like you start eating into that money and it's like, okay, we got to get doing something, man.
Get this ball rolling again. So let's talk about this actually. And I think this would be good for really anybody, but particularly a beginner when they start in the stock market. Because when you start at 18 years old, you've only got $100 a month or whatever the case is. But part of the psychology of, how do you set goals to achieve for yourself when you're doing this? Because, one of the risks, because it's one thing if you work a job and you want to make X amount this year, you can see how much overtime you need to do or any sales numbers you need to hit. You can calculate that out. But when it comes to investing in the stock market, you ultimately never know what's going to happen with a company's price. So if you're saying, do I want to make 50,000 this year, 100,000 this year? If you're trying to hit a certain dollar amount, couldn't that push you to take maybe risks that might have bited you later?
Yes, and I don't actually really make any goals in terms of like short-term goals, investing money in the market, or I'm going to try to make this much money this year, because when you do start doing that, it can lead to worse decision making in the stock market. Income is different than investing. Investing, you really have to take a long approach. And if all of a sudden you're trying to say, I'm trying to make 100,000 from stocks this year, you're going to end up likely making short-term decisions that aren't in your favor over the long term. And you could end up making a lot of mistakes. And something I like to just focus on is growth. At the end of the day, did I grow, over the past year? Yes. Did I grow the past year? Yes. Did I grow over that year? Yes. That's the name of the game. It's growth. It's not about setting short-term goals. It's just about, am I growing my accounts? Am I in a position where I can invest more money? Am I in a position where these stocks are going to succeed over the next 3 and 5 years? And just focus on growth. As long as you do that, you can get to a place where you have 6 figures plus in the stock market or 7 figures plus over time. So
if you had a year where you made 50%, you had these huge gains, the next year you made 15, you wouldn't necessarily be upset?
100%. Yeah. So like, for instance, this past year, the public account was probably up 140% or 160%. Like ridiculous. The best year I've ever had in the stock market in my life over the past year, right? In the middle of a once in a 100-year health event. Who would have thought it? But that return is crazy ridiculous. I do not expect to get another 140 to 160% return this year, and I don't expect it next year. If I get 10% or 20% or 30% or 40%, great. My goal each year is to try to get 20 to 40%. That's my goal. But I don't put any stress on that goal. So if I only get 5% this year, I'll take it for what it is. Because that probably means there was a lot of good deals in the market and I got to buy into some stocks for some cheaper prices. And so that just means more gains are going to be accelerated in the future. And so, you know, I usually kind of put, if I do make a goal, it's around percentage gain, but I don't stress about it.
So it sounds like it's more of a guideline than a goal.
100%. It's more of a guideline. I mean, over time, I would love to, over the next 10 years, be able to get 20% to 40% on average per year. If I don't hit it one year, I don't be like, oh my gosh, I'm horrible at investing or something like that. It's just sometimes you have a bad year. Sometimes things didn't go right. Sometimes it's just a bad year for the stock market. And other times you're going to, you know, make way more money than you ever dreamed in a particular year. That's just the way it goes.
So with it, you said something in the interview with Meet Kevin the other day that I thought was interesting. Because again, if someone's brand new, what's their big concern? Losing money, right?
Correct.
You know, I mean, because you work for your money, and if you know, depending on the type of work you do and how much you're making, I mean, if you maybe save up $1,000, $5,000, that could take you a lot of time to save that money. So, you know, to put it at risk of losing it is a big fear that a lot of people have. But you said something interesting that I thought when you were asked about losing money, your biggest loss in the stock market. And I want to hear you say this to give that perspective to people, because it was a great, I think, shift in mentality of how to think of your biggest losses.
Yeah. In terms of my biggest losses, it's not like I lost money on a stock. Like if you're doing this for years and years, eventually you're going to pick a bad stock. You'll have to sell for a loss. Like there's just no way you're going to do this for 10, 20, 30 years and not sometimes pick bad stocks, right? But my biggest losses have been like opportunities where I didn't invest in a company and they had huge potential futures, and I just, you know, I saw it and then I was just like, maybe got a little greedy about pricing. I'm like, well, if it drops 2 more %, that's where I'll buy, and then it doesn't do it. And you know, that's my biggest, if I could ever have regrets in the stock market, is some of these stocks I've come across over time and maybe didn't invest in that one and, you know, chose to be on the sideline and then watched it thrive over the next 5-10 years and be like, why did I invest a little bit in that stock again? Remind me again.
So I think a big one you gave was Amazon, was an example, because I think you did a video 3-4 years ago about Amazon. I think it was called like $800 stock versus $8 stock.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, something
That's a
like
classic.
that. I remember watching that probably a year or so ago, and then seeing Amazon's share price now, I mean, in the thousands of dollars for one share. And I remember like, wow, like it wasn't that long ago that stock was pretty cheap. And you know, how much it had just gone up. So, I mean, it sounds like you're more of the favor of like, okay, you're better off, I don't want to say, not say pulling, because I don't want people to think like taking unnecessary risk, but like
the risk has to be calculated. But a lot of times, if it's a truly great growth company that you are 100% believe in over the next 5-10 years, a lot of times it just makes sense to buy it regardless of valuation. And Amazon's a perfect example of that company where it's just like, like you know, it was clear it's a great company. And I mean, if you like ask anybody, like, are they going to order more packages over the next year from Amazon than they did the past year? Of course. And like in the future, like that's just the way it is. Like every year I order more and more stuff on Amazon, right? It's just the way it is. And you know, never mind Amazon Web Services. That's just a perfect example of a company. And at 800, people thought, you know, you could definitely make a case like, whoa, it had gone up so much, it's expensive. Now the stock's 3,000 plus. You know what I mean? So, you know, expensive is relative. When it's a truly great growth company, it really doesn't matter too much about valuation. It's about that business underlying.
So, yeah, so at a certain point, it's like, you know, pull the trigger.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much. Yep. With great growth companies, that is the story. That happened to me this past year in Shopify. You know, I just viewed Shopify and I was like, the stock looked expensive, and the stock's always looked expensive. And I'm like, I can either have regrets about how I didn't buy it under 100, or I can just put money in now. And so I just put money in now, and I'm like, let's see where this goes over the next 5-10 years. I think it's going to do pretty well. So let's just put it that way.
Cool. So something else that I wanted to bring up. So if someone says, as a beginning investor, or they're new to picking stocks, and we've talked about before, like, okay, you're trying to understand the business, like the income statement, the balance sheet, because you can watch a lot of that on YouTube and really learn on your own. There's a lot of information to find. But one of the things that you've talked about before in your videos is critical to a company and their success. And one of the things I think that is very nuanced to try to understand is the CEO.
Yeah.
Because, if you look on any company's website, they're going to have all great things to say about their CEO, right? I mean, everyone's going to make their CEO, talk about their history and their work experience, what they've done, and make them sound great. So if every time you look at a company CEO, they sound great, how do you decipher, who you think is going to be a good CEO and who's not?
Yeah, it's tough. That's probably the toughest thing for me to teach, because it's usually not like there's one specific thing that I can say, look for a CEO with 10 years experience, or look for a CEO with 30. It doesn't work like that. You get better gut feelings when you get more experience in the market. And now I've been doing this so long, intuitively, I'm almost always right about a CEO overall nowadays. There's been very few situations in the past several years where I wasn't right on the CEO. So I wish that was more of a subject I could teach, but it's really hard. There's something about it, you feel it. You listen to the conference calls, you watch them talk about the company, maybe in interviews and things like that. And there's just a certain kind of like vibe I can pick up on now where I'm like, yeah, this is a winner. And then there's certain vibes you can pick up sometimes, and it's like, no, this isn't one. But it's really, really difficult for me to teach that. It's the hardest thing for me to teach by a mile, honestly. I'm sorry. It's just it's almost impossible to teach, I'll be honest.
Well, there was one thing you said recently in a video, I think it was just this past week, about how much the CEO talks about the past versus the future.
That's important. Yeah.
I think it's that if they're talking like 75% or more about what they've done and what's going on right now, and then that's usually a good sign, versus if they're always saying, we're going to do this, and they're trying to sell you on this vision that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, that's one of those kind of like, I guess you can say it like a hunch thing that I'll pick up on, is like, yeah, if they're consistently just driving the conversation to, future stuff and not really about like what's going on today and what's gone on in the past and why that could translate to the future, that is a little bit of a worrisome sign. Specifically, and when I was talking about that specifically, if it's these like SPAC situations or like IPOs, things like that. I mean, you really want to find companies that have proven stuff, because a lot of people right now are investing in companies that, they don't have much going for their business model. They either have no revenue or lack of revenue, and they're getting caught into some of those. And like, sometimes those can pay off big in a hot market, but man, a lot of times they just don't. So.
Right. Okay, so that was one of those hundreds. So that was really just something you developed over time of hearing so many CEOs talk. You're like, you notice that trend.
Yeah.
As if they're constantly pushing the future. You're like,
yeah,
it usually doesn't work out too well.
Yeah, especially if they've been a CEO of that company for several years.
Right.
If it's like a new CEO, and that's kind of where you get into some of these nuanced things. If it's like a new CEO who's just coming into the company, okay, I could understand them talking more about the future because they haven't been CEO, and especially if they come from a new company, right? So in that situation, I'd be like, okay, I can understand that. But yeah, if they've been CEO of that company for a while, and it's like, then I worry. Yeah.
Exactly. So another thing I want to talk about when it comes to not just necessarily just stock market investing, but the business world as well, is, because some people can be business owners and entrepreneurs, and they're really artistic, really creative. Others are maybe, not so much. They're very structured about how they do things and that kind of thing. And in the finance realm, what's interesting, because remember when like Andre came on? Yeah. Andre's obviously incredibly artistic and creative, okay, with the kind of content he does and the way he works. Now, when your videos, they're very just information driven. The editing between you and Andre is obviously very different, right?
Oh, for sure.
And that kind of thing, right? So like editing or the band or artwork, all that kind of stuff. So in that way, you're very different. But one of the ways I notice this, I think that, your creativity shows is when you talk about companies and you give your bullish thesis and you're able to see potential like years down the road. So one of them was when you were talking about Tesla, and people were like, oh, well, they're just a car company. And you're like, no. You're like, there's so much more they're going to get into later. And the big one that stood out to me that I didn't even think about when you said it was like advertising in the vehicles. Like think of companies are going to be paying to advertise in Tesla's cars. Like that's just another source of revenue for the company. So, I mean, from your perspective, I mean, how are you able to see some of those potential possibilities when you think of that? Like how can you, 3 to 5 years out think like, all right, the company's doing this today, but in a few years I could see them doing this, because that's your creative side.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, part of it's doing it for so many years. I've been, doing this for 12 plus years now. So, and when you're stock market investing, you're constantly researching different companies, different industries, different sectors, different businesses, and different ways different companies do business, right? And so you can start piecing things together the more you understand about business. And like stock market investing and really looking into these companies, I feel like puts your business IQ on like level 1,000, just because you get to see so dang much. And you get to really understand all these different companies so well, and some of the best and biggest companies in the world. And so I think because I've been doing this for so long now, that I'm just able to pick up on things and kind of tie and put like 2 and 2 together, I guess you can say. And so like, folks that might be watching this and you haven't got into stock market investing yet, if it's like a route you're going to go and you start doing this, like you're just going to notice your business IQ is going to pick up. And that's just what happens. I mean, imagine the business IQ of like Jeff Bezos or like some of these, crazy businessmen that have accomplished so much. I mean, their business IQ is like crazy. And, there's it's kind of like there's an IQ in, let's call the academic space, right? And then there's an IQ in the business space. And a lot of times they're not correlated at all, right? But it's just the more you're around it, the more you know. And the more you can see futures and those sorts of things.
So speaking of that creativity, going forward here, like in the near future, which industries would you say, which ones excite you the most? Which ones, you see like, wow, the potential here is so amazing that, like if you could teleport 3 to 5 years in the future from now, which ones would you really want to see?
Yeah, I mean, there's several of them. Obviously the EV one is I don't want to say played out, but obviously everybody's in that one. So that's been the hot one that everybody's jumped in the past year or so. I think in the cannabis space, I think that's massive, because I mean, you're talking about, this is such a huge underlying industry. The demand for the product's already there. Like, people, have been enjoying that product for, decades and decades now, more on the DL, right? And now industry is going to start going more and more legal. We just saw 4 more states legalize. Obviously here in Vegas and Nevada in general, we've been legalized for a while now. And federal legalization could come. So that industry is going to be huge. I mean, there's going to be so many billion-dollar companies in that industry, so many $10 billion+ companies, and maybe even, some that are 100 billion plus in the future. That's huge. Plant-based food products, really big one. Yeah, I mean, you've seen it with the Beyond Meat and other products as well that are, kind of replacing your traditional meat, Impossible. There's a company I'm invested in, Tattooed Chef, that's really exciting. They make a lot of different products that are frozen items, but are plant-based and are much better, nutritional value for you than other products that are out there on the market. Very good food companies. Another company I'm invested in that's a player in that market that's very fast growing. So that's another industry. So those 3 industries are the ones that really come to mind that are huge. 5G is starting to be played out a little bit, but it's still a multi-year event. Like a lot of people don't even have a 5G phone yet. That's going to change over the next 2, 3, 4 years. And I think everybody's going to pretty much have a 5G phone within a few years. So yeah, those are some of the sectors that come to mind.
So one of them you mentioned, I want to dive in a little more, because it would seem like maybe you've put too much into this particular industry, but you explained this the other day on Meet Kevin's interview. It's like, actually, they're a bit different. And that was the plant-based food products. So people were looking like vegan stocks, and those kinds of companies. So you're invested in 3 of them. And you typically keep, under 20 stocks in your portfolio.
Correct. Yeah, 20 or under I try to hold.
So I think you said normally usually 15 to 17 in that ballpark. So if you have 15 to 17 and 3 of them are plant-based companies, how do you, when you look at them, how do you say, okay, I'm say 20 or about 20% of my stocks are in just this industry. So how do you feel balanced with all of that?
Yeah, so right now I think across all my different accounts, I probably have about 20 stocks right now, right around 20, maybe 19 or 20. So 3 of those are in that industry. But yeah, they're all different players. So the way I kind of think about it is, you look at Beyond Meat, right? That's one of my investments. That's the big giant, right? We see Beyond Meat working deals all over the place. They just announced a deal with Pizza Hut very recently, a potential deal in the works with McDonald's, which could be crazy big.
Yeah.
They're testing products at Taco Bell right now. We've seen them obviously do deals with a lot of other companies recently that are maybe smaller and things like that. So, that's the giant, right? And that's the one you're going to see at all your supermarkets. Tattooed Chef, they're plant-based, but they're playing more from a perspective of like frozen, like prepackaged meals and things like that.
Like a meal prep.
Yeah, exactly. So, like in my freezer out there, we have a product that I love. They're the acai bowls or whatever, the ACAI, I don't know. Acai bowls, okay? I never know how to pronounce it. But those things are amazing, man. You put it in the microwave for like a minute, it's frozen, and then you kind of stir it around and it's still cold, but it's, oh man, it's so good, and it's got the fruits in it and everything. It's amazing. So anyways, yeah, we got those products, and they make so many other products. But and then Very Good Food Company, which is... they're kind of competing a little bit with a Beyond Meat, but they're like a little brother of the space. I mean, we're talking about a super small company compared to Beyond Meat. Beyond Meat's a giant in the industry. Very Good Food Company is a little teeny one that's growing super fast. So yeah, they all play in different spaces. And the food industry, you think about it, it's like everybody needs to eat. I mean, you're talking about, this is one of the biggest, if not the biggest industry in the entire world. There's going to be many players in that space, with more and more folks starting to kind of move toward more plant-based diets, and bright futures on all 3 of those, in my opinion. So
when it does come to your investing, whether it's 15, 19, 20 stocks, do you ever feel, do you try to make sure you don't put too much into a certain industry? So like, tech companies, would you ever want to hold the big boys like Facebook, Google, Apple, I mean, all at the same time? Would you want to have 4 or 5 tech companies out of 20 that you're holding? Yeah,
I could see that. And the reason is, nowadays, I mean, just tech runs the world for the most part. Right. So it's hard really not to be invested into a lot of different tech companies. It's just the day and age we're living in. I mean, you think about the apps industry, you think about just like where are most people spending most of their time? It's on their phones, on their tablets, on their computers. So, and whenever you're involved in that, it's all internet based, right? And so when you think about it from that perspective, it's hard not to be, invested heavily in a lot of different tech companies, because it's just, that's where we're living our lives. So if that's where we're living our lives, like, you got to be invested there.
Right.
So,
but I mean, if it was another industry, I mean, if you had 20 stocks and say 4 or 5 of them were in a different industry, I mean, do you ever get to a point where you're like, okay, I should probably diversify into some other industries?
Yeah, I do feel like that. I mean, if it's other industries, like, for instance, and I mean, the way I kind of think about it, almost everything's a tech company for the most part nowadays, it's crazy, right? But I break it down like industry specific and specific with that company. So like, Amazon's a tech company, Apple's a tech company, but they're so vastly different when you really break it down. Like, Amazon has these massive warehouses. Yes, everybody goes to order something through a website or an app, right? But they really have these massive warehouses. They're shipping product, they're driving cars. Apple's making iPhones and an app store and software and things like that. Like, although they're both tech, they're not even close to being remotely close. And then Amazon Web Services, and so when I look at it from that perspective, I never even really think about it. I take it on a stock by stock basis, and I say, do these companies compete at all? Not really. And Amazon and Apple, maybe they compete at something in some spaces, but for the most part, they're so vastly different.
Right.
Just because they're tech, I don't really look at it like that. Kind of like we talked about plant-based food. Beyond Meat's not really a competitor of Tattooed Chef, just because they're going down the same lane. They're not really competitors. So.
Okay. And, when it comes to your strategy, when you pick stocks, right? I mean, one of the things I like about, when you talk stocks is it sounds like you have a pretty good balance of risk versus reward. Because some people, they just want to get dividends because they really hate any kind of risk. And, they just really want to have those dividends coming in that are going to grow throughout their lifetime that they can live off of. Some people are just YOLO with there's YOLO in their stock picks, right? They see what's hot, right? What's on Wall Street bets or whatever's trending or whatever, new cryptocurrency is big, and they're just like jumping on it, hoping to get big, But you're in that that middle space where you like that 3 to 5 year mark. But how did you get to that point? Because Warren Buffett was the one you said really taught you, and he's very much a value investor.
Yeah.
So how did you come to that point where was there someone else who kind of pushed you that direction? Or did you just say, I can tolerate more risk than this guy?
Well, I think it was just experimentation over time got me to that place because I'm self-taught, so I didn't have somebody really to guide me. I watched YouTube interviews with different people like Warren Buffett and some that I really enjoy, but I never had like an actual person to be like my mentor and like, hey, here's how you do it. Right. So a lot of it was experimentation. I realized in some of my, early years, let's say my first 5 years, I don't think I was taking enough risk. Mm-hmm. And then in 2014 and 2015, I found out I was taking too much risk. I was doing like earnings trades and margin trading, a lot of crazy stuff. And so through those two different experiences, it really taught me I need to find a happy medium.
Right.
And that's what I was really able to develop over the last, I would say 3 or 4 years to a pretty high level of this 3 to 5 year outlook, risk versus reward, where I can't just get into stocks or be doing activities that are just about the reward potential, because then I'm going to take too much risk. I'm going to set myself up for failure. And at the same time, I can't take too little risk. Otherwise, I'm going to miss out on a ton of potential huge reward stocks.
Right.
And, somebody like, I have a ton of respect for Warren Buffett, who's built a tremendous fortune over the years, right? It could have been a lot bigger. He's watched companies like Apple and Amazon and Google and Facebook and countless others, Microsoft, come out and not been able to invest in because he can't do growth stocks and tech stocks. And so that's obviously not 100% the best approach, especially in this day and age when tech stocks run the world, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it slowly developed over years, and that's how I got to this place now.
Okay. And you're all in on this strategy. I know you do some dividend investing. I
do.
You put in with some options, I think, on Dropbox lately.
Yeah, I have some options riding on Dropbox. And then I do own some dividend stocks, no doubt. I don't invest usually in dividend stocks. I have a dividend portfolio in my private group just to basically see how a dividend portfolio performs. And that one's actually doing surprisingly good. I'm amazed. I'm like, what? Like the gains that account has had, and it's only a little over a year old. I'm like, that's ridiculous. But anyways, and when it comes to portfolio, I even think about that in risk reward. So I don't want to be all in just super high flying growth stocks.
Right.
I want to be in some values. I want to be in some divs. I want to be in some turnarounds. Mm-hmm. And if you're a truly, truly great investor, which is something, I'm obviously trying to be focused on, I feel like you have to be focused on all these disciplines and be a high level person in all those different disciplines. Mm-hmm. So.
Okay. But when it comes to, growing your money in terms of investing, because there's lots of tools that people use, and a lot of things that maybe are more common that a larger percent of the population use, like they may go to a financial advisor, they may use a Roth IRA. You're a business owner, maybe use a SEP IRA, or they use index funds or anything like that. You don't do any of that, correct?
No, I don't have anybody manage any of my money. I haven't since I was 18, 19. Today, I still don't. Nope.
And you've never, so you just said at 18 or 19, you were just going to jump and you're just going to learn it on your own without...
100%. Yep. And I've always been like that ever since. Yeah, I'm not interested in anybody managing my money or anything like that. So, no.
Jeez.
Yeah, that's the way I've always been, and I just... when it's interesting. So obviously growing up, my parents never invested. Right. So, that was just like, there was no guidance. Mm-hmm. So I think since there was no guidance, or like, oh, mom's got a 401k or dad's got a 401k, there was no guidance for me when it came to investing or anything like that. So I'm just like, I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do. Right. And so I never even really looked at it as like being a weird thing. I just was like, well, I'm ready to go. Let's get going. How do I set up a brokerage account? Found that out, and then I set it up and got rolling.
So basically, it sounds like kind of like a lack of guidance was a blessing.
Yeah. As long as you have the ambition, sometimes it can be, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because some people, they come from an environment where they're used to, all right, family puts money in a 401k because their dad worked has worked in the professional world, or mom has worked here, so they always do an IRA or whatever the case is. But that wasn't exposed to you, so you were like, it wasn't even on your radar to do that.
No, it wasn't even on my radar to do that. I'm just like, what? And I was learning about stocks and like how to do it, and I'm just like, let me get rolling with this. I think I got a Fidelity account set up because I was working at Walgreens and they had a stock purchase program where you could get, I think it was 10% off Walgreens shares or something like that. And a lot of big companies have something like that. And so right off the bat, I was already starting to look into stocks and I was thinking about that. And I was like, wait, I can get 10% off the shares and all I got to hold it for is 3 months. I'm like, that's just like free money. Do it. And so I would buy like, I don't know, however much. I'd have a certain amount of my check go toward those shares.
Right.
And I got that account set up. And then next thing you know, I was like, okay, now I got to start finding more stocks to invest in. I just went.
Jeez. Well, let's talk about this when it comes to family and money and investing and, what kids learn from their parents. Because we talked about how, so you were the food stamp family, but your father went the business route. So you were able to learn a lot and then continue going the business route that your father had set out. So, you obviously have gone to another level with that. And, we've talked, off camera about college and university and that kind of thing. And, obviously anybody who looks at university knows the cost of it now and how expensive it is. But for where you're at, for your own kids, as they grow up, they get into their teenage years, into adulthood. Do you plan to steer them in the direction of, hey, invest in these stocks? Do you plan to say, hey, you should go down the entrepreneurship route? Do you encourage them to go to college and university? It's still kind of up in the air.
Yeah, so my firstborn, he's gonna be first pick overall in the NFL. So there's not really that much worried about that. And the second
financial advisor.
And the second kid's gonna be a singer. So they don't even need to worry about money. No, I'm just kidding. But no, it's in terms of like the kids and whatnot. I definitely want. They're just going to naturally pick up on a lot of stuff. My 6-year-old already is buying stocks and wants to buy stocks. So, that is what it is. I'll definitely make sure they're on kind of the right path. My perspective on my kids is just because I have a lot of money doesn't mean you have a lot of money. You know what I mean? Like as the kids, dad and mom's money's dad and mom's money. Like you got to go out and make it on your own and do these things on your own. So that's really my perspective. I don't want my kids to be the kids that are, just going around on yachts all day doing nothing with their life. You know what I mean? Like
$100,000 car. And their 16th birthday.
Yes, exactly. That's no, not you guys. Okay, like you're gonna make it on your own and do those own things. Because I think there's a lot of I think you get a lot of self-worth out of achieving things and doing things on your own versus just being like, just here's a $5 million or something like that. Like I just don't think that's the best way. But I'm going to always focus on making sure they're educated and, they know things. I'll just put it that way. And that's what I do with almost everybody that comes in close contact to me. So, of course, I'm going to do it with my own kids, over time as they get older and things like that. So,
So it sounds like, you're going to not necessarily push them to say you need to do stocks, you need to do business, you need to do college. You'll guide them, but it's like, you're going to go your own route and you're going to choose your own destiny. Yeah,
exactly. I'll make sure they're educated and tell them about their options and then whatever they kind of choose and what they want to do, that's their own call. So,
okay. And then that's actually probably a good segue into talking about one thing you've talked about some on your channels, but I haven't heard you go into like a ton of detail, was philanthropy and some of the philosophy around money. And, because a lot of these people who become incredibly wealthy, right? Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, a lot of them, they get so wealthy, and they've got more money than they can even think of what to do with it. And they choose to give it away to charitable causes or things like that. And you've said you want to do a similar kind of thing, and you want to actually have the ability to change some ways that charity and philanthropy is done.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there's some money that's definitely wasted there and it's just not allocated the right way and just the way things are structured is not always the best. So I think things can change there. But that's been a big goal since when I probably needed charity when I had a few $100 to my name, right? I remember hearing about, Warren Buffett specifically speak about that and, how he was going to give away his fortune. And I remember that just resonated with me even though I was only 18, 19 years old when I heard that. And ever since that time, that's been a huge overall guiding light and mission in my life is to let's make a ton of money in this lifetime and then whenever the time comes give it away essentially and do it in the best way possible. And I just always thought that was so cool because obviously I grew up in a family that that wasn't even a thing, right? And if you think about having a lot of money, I just thought I guess you could just give it to your kids or something like that. But when I heard from that perspective, I was like, oh, that's really dang cool. He's going to give away 99% of his wealth. And I was like, I would love to be able to do something like that in my lifetime. and change people's lives, hopefully for the better, and do certain things. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, growing up in the United States, it's a huge advantage, right?
Right.
I mean, even if you grow up poor or middle class, I mean, it's still a huge advantage versus when you really get educated on the world. And what some people grow up into, like, you realize, oh man, I had it good. Like, even in my younger years when I was, just a little guy, and we might have been on some government programs and things like that, right? I mean, that's still amazing compared to like the way people have it in other countries. Like they don't even have like that option, right? I mean, a lot of them, there's you go to some parts of the country, or some parts of the world. I mean, a lot of these folks don't even have a true home.
Yeah, they're walking 2 miles every day for clean water.
Yeah. So I mean, when you really get educated on like a world view, you realize like how good we like truly have it. So so I think that just kind of broadened my perspective, and that's always kind of been a guiding light, and it's still a guiding light to me to this day. So
because one thing people would wonder is, really once your basic needs are met, I mean, once you have a certain amount of income, whether it's a few $100,000 a year, well, once you are set, okay, with a roof over your head, you got food in your stomach, you're able to take care of everything you need, and then some, what is the purpose of, continuing to make millions of more dollars and to grow a company, to grow a business, to take on other projects? I mean, what's the driving force once you've already got everything you need?
Yeah, and I think there's a few different things that I've kind of seen from my perspective as I've been able to build businesses and things like that. Like, one is you want to be able to provide more opportunities for like current employees to hopefully make more money, right? So they can live a better life, because not all your employees are going to be able to make $1 million a year. That's just not the way it works. But that person that might be making $50K, you would love for them to be able to make $60K or $70K next year. So that's a perspective. Also, like just being able to hire more employees in general and give that opportunity out there to folks, to come have a good job, doing this or doing that. So there's definitely that perspective that I've kind of seen, and that weighs heavy. And like, I'm like, wow, this is like, they're being able to support their family. They're being able to change their life because they've come on to my company and been able to do this position or that position, and got out of whatever situation they were in. So that's really powerful. Obviously, like, philanthropy and like those sorts of things, I think that helps keep me motivated on a long-term basis. Because once you have, a lot of money, it's like, okay, I could go retire for the rest of my life and sit on a beach. But also that kind of gets boring, right? I mean, coming from somebody that did it for over a year, like I was just like, dang, man, like, woo, it's really cool for the first few weeks. And then over time, it's like, okay, what do I do today? I'm going to go to the gym, and then I'm going to go home and watch TV, or you know what I mean? Like, it's just...
Yeah. So the purpose feels like, it's like, okay, I'm existing, but what is my purpose?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that, and then also, there's also, I think, a need to kind of stay busy, stay doing stuff. And because, like I said, it can get, people that maybe haven't done it, or like look at it and they're like, oh, that sounds amazing. But it gets a little boring, especially when you're younger and you have ambition. I think everybody's like has this like thought like, oh my gosh, it'd be great to retire in your 20s or 30s. Like I said, I did that for over a year, and I was just like, geez, man, it gets when you have ambition and things like that, you're just like, why am I not doing something? And then you see other people doing stuff and accomplishing things and building companies and hiring people and things like that, and you're like, why am I not doing that?
Yeah, when you see other people and you're like, you feel stagnant compared to them, you're like, okay, I'm not staying like this.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
I can't keep staying like this.
Yep, 100%, man.
Okay. Well, I mean, we've covered quite a bit here. Was there any other topic you want to talk about?
Not really. This has been a fun chat, man. I love this.
Well, let me hit you with a final one.
Okay.
Here, I think, and this is one more introspective. If you had to start it all over, if you had to start everything over again, say this house, money, everything, every asset you have is taken from you, and you're back at zero.
Back at zero.
You're back at zero. You're 18 years old.
Okay.
And Jeremy again.
Yep.
What do you do?
What do? I focus on still learning, assuming I don't have any knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. I would still focus on learning investing in stocks first and foremost, so I could start acquiring that business knowledge and start understanding the role of investing money, because it's just about getting that ball rolling, man. And you start seeing the gains, and you start seeing like the success, and you're like, oh man, I built, I made 10% on this stock. That I would focus on, and then maybe maybe I would have started a business a little earlier, but I felt like the time was right because I don't feel like when I was that, younger, I felt like I wasn't ready to really truly start businesses and build them yet. I just wasn't mentally quite confident enough in things like that and how to put these things together. So, I mean, interestingly enough, I probably wouldn't change much. I probably would have done it the same exact way. That's the weirdest thing. Like I don't think I would have changed a darn thing.
Take all those same losses you took early, or all those slow gains,
Yeah.
all the bumps in the road.
Yeah. Ultimately, all that stuff has to play out. You always say, well, I could have done this a little better, or I could have bought this stock. But at the end of the day, man, I can't really take anything back. I probably would have done it the same way because, I might not be in this position I'm in today if it wasn't for certain things I had to go through or certain obstacles and things like that.
Right. Well, I mean, even with all those bumps, it was good. Because what'd you say, 200,000 by 25?
Yeah, correct.
And then $1 million by.
I was
before 30.
I was a multimillionaire before 30. Yeah.
Yeah. So multimillionaire before 30. So I mean, even with the slow growth in the beginning,
Yeah.
even with some of the losses you took, I think you did okay.
Yeah, I can't complain, man. I can't complain. But hey, then you got the Snapchat guy. He created Snapchat. He was worth like billions, and I think it was 24 or something. So
Yeah.
there was always that comparison. But don't play that game. It's a losing game.
Exactly. So, man, I appreciate you sitting down and talking like this. So
Thank
I wanted
you.
to dive into some of the financial stuff, but I also wanted to get some of the backstory on you for people to see. So
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
you're welcome, dude. Thanks for having me in the house here.
Don't forget to smash the thumbs up for Jacob. This man deserves it. He deserves the maximum smashing. Okay, guys.
Thanks, bro.
Yeah, max smash this man.
Hey, alrighty, guys. This has been a great one. I'm glad that Jeremy's been the first person to actually get to interview on this channel. The first of more interviews and millionaire interviews to come. So hey, one last time, thanks, Jeremy.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks again for having me, man.
Thank you guys for watching. I am Jacob. This is Money Growth Project, and I'll see you guys again soon.
Peace. That was good.
That was good, man. Thanks.
What was that one? 25 again?
Pretty darn close. 28.
Dang.